Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. My name is Andrew, and I'm joined alongside my co-host Jeff, as always. Jeff and I are writers and directors and passionate about the art of storytelling. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, and today we are speaking with writers and directors of American Skyjacker, Eli Kooris and Joshua Shaffer. Guys, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We were just chatting before we started recording. Eli, you were in my office just a few months ago, so it's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Small world.
I know, it is a small world, man, but let's jump right in. So first of all, this is a fantastic documentary. I really liked it. I watched it today. It's a page turner, man. You can't put it down. It's really, really good. So congrats on that. But for the context of the audience who may not be familiar with the film, let's start with you, Eli. Tell us what this film is about.
This film is about a time in modern American history where there was no security on airplanes and flying was a joy, which I think everybody's heard about and wishes still is the case. People started taking advantage of this new form of technology and air travel, and they started hijacking planes. Initially, it was to make a political statement, fly me to Cuba, Viva la Revolucion. It became so popular, in fact, that there was a Time magazine article published about what to do in Cuba when you're hijacked. It's like a sort of funny vacation piece. And then people all started hijacking planes to rob them and basically hold people for ransom and demand a bunch of money from the FBI. And the most famous of those was D.B. Cooper, who hijacked a plane leaving Portland, Oregon, and demanded $200,000 and 2 parachutes. And the FBI brought them to him. The plane took off. He jumped out of the back and was never heard from again. Maybe he died in the forest. Maybe he lived his days out, with the $200,000 and is sort of the quintessential criminal who stuck it to the man and got away with it. And so there's a ton of lore about him. And he was instantly famous. And 6 months later, a guy copycatted him, a guy named Martin McNally, who hijacked a plane in St. Louis. He decided to demand $500,000, more than double what D.B. Cooper demanded, and 5 parachutes, cutting his losses there, and jump out of the plane the same way. And that is what this documentary is about. But what makes this different in the D.B. Cooper story is that the D.B. Cooper story doesn't have a second and third act, which has always been kind of a flaw of it. You don't really know what happened to him. It's all speculation. Whereas Martin McNally, we know exactly what happened to him, and he also tells us the whole story in words in the documentary, staring directly down the barrel of the camera. So his story, too, is what I described is just barely scratching the surface. There's so many ridiculous twists and turns that happen just in the hijacking alone. And then there's him on the run for 5 days, hiding out in a motel. And then there's him, not to give anything away, going to prison and who he meets in prison. And I'll let you guys watch it and figure out the rest because it gets wilder from there.
Yeah, well, Joshua, how did you and Eli get connected, write the story and get it off the ground?
Well, there's a journalist named Danny Wicentowski who wrote for the Riverfront Times in St. Louis. He wrote an article about Martin, and he wrote an article about a helicopter pilot who makes an appearance in our story as well, named Alan Barklage. And he wrote a fantastic article, and we read it and we loved it. And we reached out to him. And we initially thought, hey, because at the time, Eli and I were writing scripts in Los Angeles, dramatic television scripts. We thought this would make a great miniseries. This would make a great event series. And so we reached out to Danny, and he was into the idea of collaborating. But he was like, if you guys want, I can intro you to Martin himself. And then everything started to change in our minds a little bit about what this project could become. It was Eli's idea to just go and visit Martin in person and get his entire story on tape for posterity's sake, just so we had it. And once we got that, we cut a little sizzle reel from Martin's story, and we started to take it around town. And it was during that process where we thought, okay, this could be a scripted series. Here's this incredible story. Here's this incredible true story. Then we were thinking, okay, maybe this could be a doc series, since he had not just a hijacking story, but multiple hijacking stories, prison escape stories, an entire lifetime worth of stories and a mind like a steel trap. So he knew every detail, every time, every day, every moment by heart. And he was just an incredible, accessible, truthful storyteller. And again, the idea morphed in our brains, and we brought it to a company called Imperative. And they had just started their podcast division, and they said, "Why don't you guys make it into a podcast first?" And we did. And we had Martin on tape for all of that. So it was a pretty easy pivot to then create the feature documentary, which is what we've done.
Well, Eli, I want to pivot back to you because, as Joshua, you were saying, um, he's a very charismatic storyteller, and having him tell the story right to the audience works great. And a lot of filmmakers would have just left it at that because it's an amazing story just the way he tells it. But you guys stepped it up a notch. What I really liked are the way you did the reenactments. They were so well acted, so well done, shot very interestingly. The production design, represented the period. At what point did you decide to go that direction with the reenactments and add that to the mix?
I think we always knew that we had to do cinematic recreations and reenactments to really capture the full story in the documentary form. Because with the podcast, you have your imagination, carrying you along the way, and we have these dramatic narrative podcasts. We kind of try to think of them more as radio plays because I think when most people think of podcasts, they think about, people talking back and forth like we are now doing an interview and everything like that. Just, fascinating medium in its own right. But when you're telling this sort of story or having somebody tell you this sort of story, you want to put the audience member there as much as you can. And that's why we did sort of cinematic sound and sound design for the podcast season itself. So we kind of wanted to replicate that when we did the doc. And so if you're going to make that leap with something like this, we're suddenly faced with the problem like, well, now we need a 727 airplane from the late 70s or early 70s. Now we need to figure how the car crash at the airport that happens, which I don't want to give away, but then so we needed all these things, and it became this incredible production challenge, which probably took years off the end of my life, but was honestly very, very rewarding at the end of the day to be able to pull off for like a lower budget and figure out how to make it work. And then there was also the aspect of like, well, what do we show and what do we not show? What do you need to really see here to get the point across? And then also, and this was, Josh's masterful editing because he ultimately got his hands dirty in the editing process after we had initial cut and whittle it down to the most important 98 minutes of this tale that really keeps us moving. I mean, you mentioned earlier that it was a page turner, and that's great to hear because that was our goal. It was like, we don't want anybody to be able to take a breath throughout this. We want it to move the whole time.
Yeah. And this question is for either one of you. I'm curious, what were maybe the most valuable things you learned from doing the podcast first before the documentary in terms of maybe audience feedback, the, production company's feedback, what you guys learned just in general that helped inform creative decisions?
I would say whether it's scripted, unscripted, if I could do a podcast before any project, I think I would go that direction. It was a great way to break out the story and to figure out what are the moments that capture people's attention, what are the moments that don't capture, what can we leave on the cutting room floor. And then even that was, we had a robust 6.5 hours of story to then say, okay, now let's distill that down to an hour and a half. And then you just have nothing but bangers when it comes to moments. And it's weird to pitch a documentary as action packed, but the truth is there are so many set pieces in this story that it is action packed. There's just too many exciting moments, and we really had to pack them all in there.
Yeah, the scope is very big, and there's so many twists and turns. It's like, I don't know. It's a great show, but I'm curious about something else. And I'll guess we'll start with you, Eli, but I also want to hear from you, Joshua. So in the process of the podcast, the interviews with Martin and so forth, did your perception of him before you went into the show and as you created these different mediums, the podcast and the film, did that perception change at all? Let's start with you, Joshua.
Absolutely, it changed. We didn't know what to expect coming into it and talking to Martin the first time. And then even sitting with him and hearing him tell the story, it wasn't until we really got into breaking that story down and fact checking the dates, and we had our journalist partner Danny helping us with all of that, that you started to really realize what a reliable and honest storyteller Mac was, which started to change my perception of him. But if I can share what solidified my perception of him, because I think Mac's a pretty fantastic person, and he's served his time, and definitely come to terms with what he's done. But we had him come to the set while we were shooting some of the recreations, and I was, as a co-director, I was dreading him coming to set. I was like, who is, what's he gonna think? Is he gonna think we're getting it all wrong? He was an absolute delight. He sat in our video village while we were shooting the fuselage scenes. And what a surreal experience that must have been for him to watch on a little screen, kind of like a portal back in time to a moment of his life that he regrets now greatly. But he was so supportive, and he was so great with our recre cast, and they had a ton of questions for him, and he answered every single one of them. And he was the last person to leave with us on set that day. It really was such a delight to have him, and I think he's great.
Eli, how about you? Any Mac stories?
Yeah, I have a number of Mac stories.
Eli's helped Mac move. Yeah.
Yeah.
No kidding. Oh, wow.
So that's a good one. Yeah, I was gonna do the Mac story, talk about the Mac story where. So in the final act, again, not I'm just giving stuff away. It doesn't matter. We wanted Mac to fly again at the end of our film because he's now out of prison, and the last time he flew, as Danny Wicentowski says, on a plane, he hijacked it. So we wanted him to come full circle here, And the issue becomes we didn't know if he was on the no-fly list because they don't tell you if you're on the no-fly list. If you're on the no-fly list, you just show up at the airport and you buy a ticket, and they're like, "Can't have that. You're on the no-fly list." So that's apparently how it works. We didn't know this, and this is when we were making the podcast. This is sort of how we ended the podcast as well. And so I tell Mac, I said, "Mac, we'd like you to fly on a plane again. Are you okay with that? Would you be okay with me buying you a ticket on an airplane?" And he said, "That sounds great." And he hangs up the phone shortly as our conversation ends. And the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from him at the airport being like, "I don't know what's happening. I don't know what I did. I bought a ticket and they sold me a ticket and I don't know how to use it." And he was very, very upset and flustered because he just went to the desk like you used to do when you would buy tickets at the airport and bought a plane ticket. I'm sure it cost him like $700 because if you just buy a ticket at the desk, and he was very annoyed about that. And so we had to get the ticket returned and figure out the whole thing. And it was just a whole ordeal. Yeah, he's a fantastic character. Going back to about the interview that we did with him, his mind is a steel trap too. Like he would tell us these dates and these things that would happen, and we would look up transcripts and details from 40, 50 years ago, and it would be dead on. It was amazing for a guy, especially a guy who spent 37 years in some of the worst prisons in America, to still have all that faculty. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and a lot of our audience are filmmakers themselves, whether they be just starting out or experienced. So I'm curious when it came to doing the recreations, the cinematic recreations, how you guys tackled it, what your productions look like. You shot it all at once, pieced it out over, a few months, years. What it kind of looked like behind the scenes.
It was about 13 days of production. We tried to find locations that would service a lot of different recre scenes. So there was a lot less company moves. The company moves are going to kill you, especially when you're on a low budget. And so that became the goal. The biggest one was obviously the plane. Do we get a plane, an actual plane? Do we just get a fuselage that we're shooting in? We ultimately settled on was a mix of two. And we found a plane and an airport that we could use, that we pretty much rented out an entire airport and old 727 plane that happened to be at this place called Paris, California. And the great thing about this airport in Paris, California, was that it was a private airport, and it was used primarily for skydiving, which also helps us too. So we were able to bundle a lot of our plane stuff, our jump out of the back of the plane, our actual skydiving stunt, all of our driving on road stunts, because, it's just some guys driving down a road. Well, as you know, in production, that requires a lot. You got to have a locked off street. You got to have all this other stuff and all these other moving parts when you're driving down a road. But the great thing about an airport is that you have a long runway, which you can easily double as a road. And so so we were able to knock out a ton of stuff in this one location we were in for 2 days, and it ultimately made it worth moving the crew out there and putting them up for a couple days to knock all of this stuff out. And then that was sort of the strategy with the rest of the shoot too. It was find these locations and center as much around that as possible, and then figure out how you pay for production design to make that work. So we found another lot that had a fuselage on it, and a lot of other back lot sets that we could build things on as well.
Yeah, I think it was just a strategy of how many birds can we kill with the fewest amount of stones, and that's indie production in a nutshell.
Well, I'm curious, you're probably already getting this question from people who've seen the film. And again, it's a great documentary. Is there any interest in turning it into a traditional narrative feature? I mean, it's the kind of show that to me, it's like actor bait. It seems like someone would want to play that role.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I think that's the next step is, as the documentary's out there in the world and people are reacting to it, doing their own adaptation of the script for it. And then, maybe seeing if there's some other offshoot stories too. This is, I mean, as you mentioned, Jeff, the story is so broad and covers so many characters and so much ground that, maybe there's a television series, maybe there's a story just about Robin Oswald, for example, or the Oswald family. There's actually the story of Garrett Trapnell, who's the other Skyjacker that McNally meets in prison. The book that was written about him, we actually got the rights to that book. So we might also do a version of that, or maybe it's another whole version of this story down the line. There's talk of even doing another season of the podcast that focuses on Garrett Trapnell, because you'll hear another bonus episode that's now out to support the film. That is the bonus episode's about a ex-FBI agent who reached out to us after the podcast came out. And she said, I used to be a producer on an ABC network show called FBI Untold Stories. And one of the episodes they did was called Lady Skyjacker, which is about the Robin Oswald hijacking that incorporates Garrett Trapnell. And she corresponded with Trapnell in prison and got the interview with him in prison and got the prison to approve it. And they did it for the show. And then she remained close to him via correspondence. And he had a lot of women who would see him via prison. She never got that far, obviously, because she ended up joining the FBI instead. But he sent her, which I actually have on my desk right now beside me, this, which is the unpublished, never before seen autobiography written by Garrett Trapnell in prison that nobody has seen or heard before. And so we have things like that too. So all these other things about Trapnell have come out of the woodwork over time. So there's probably something there about him as well. It's a very wild world, this hijacking 70s world, apparently.
Yeah, and I would just say that's where the idea started, right? We pursued the story because we initially wanted to do a scripted version of it. And I think when we read Danny's article for the first time, it was a Coen Brothers movie. It was the story of a bumbling criminal in over his head. And to us, it made sense as a scripted piece. And I think, we're going to come back to that now that we are on the other side of the documentary.
Makes sense. Well, before we wrap up, and when we do wrap up, don't hang up. I want to chat with you guys just for a couple minutes before we let you go. But how can people learn about the film? I know it's coming out at the time of this recording. It's coming out in the next few days, I believe, or the next couple of weeks. Joshua, how can they hear more about the film, learn more about the film, and then also you two individually, if they want to follow your careers, how do folks do that? So Joshua, we'll start with you.
Well, our company's Pegalo Pictures. You can follow us at pegalopictures.com pegalopictures.com or at Pegalo Pictures on Instagram. And then for the film, americanskyjacker.com is where you will find ticketing links for all of our theater showings of the movie. Will be on video on demand. You can buy the film or rent it in November. But everything you need to know is on americanskyjacker.com. And yeah, listen to the podcast. Check out the bonus episode, which comes out or is out already. And we hope you guys enjoy the film.
Awesome. Well, the movie is American Skyjacker. You guys did a fantastic job. I appreciate you taking the time to chat tonight. And keep us posted. Circle back. We'll have you on the show again.
Will do.
Be great.
All right,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping, and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.